it's funny. People actually pay incredibly good money to be locked inside escape
Oh,
rooms.
yeah, absolutely.
Like you walk in with your friends, the door clicks shut, and for the next 60 minutes, your entire existence is focused entirely on just one single objective, finding the exit.
Right, but it's uh, a completely controlled environment
Uh-huh.
and highly voluntary, which is why it feels like a game rather than, a full-blown panic attack.
Yeah, exactly. But if you step back and look at modern life, we often do the exact same thing to ourselves, just without the ticking clock. I mean, between the relentless morning commute, the bottomless email inbox, the repetitive grocery store runs, and those like perfectly color-coded digital calendars, it can really feel like we've constructed our very own inescapable rooms.
Out of nothing but our daily habits.
Right. And sometimes the only way to smash the glass, pull the fire alarm, and finally get out is to just book a flight.
I mean, we literally call taking a vacation a getaway. The very language we use casually in passing implies that we are actively fleeing a scene.
Fleeing the scene. I love that. And to understand why that urge is so universal, we really need to look at what's actually happening under the hood. So today, we are talking directly to you, the curious learner who has probably felt that exact urge to flee.
Oh, I'm sure we all have.
Right. And we're unpacking an incredible stack of research today, ranging from mental health data from the World Health Organization and the Harvard Business Review to the psychological dark arts of marketing slogans curated by Starter Story, all the way to a massive European Union report on a technology that is going to fundamentally shatter how we move across the planet. Okay, let's unpack this.
It really is a fascinating collision of human psychology, the art of persuasion, and just cutting-edge engineering. And before we can even begin to talk about the physical future of mobility, we have to understand the fundamental biological reasons why humans are driven to leave their homes in the first place, because this goes so much deeper than simply, wanting a tan on a beach.
The World Health Organization actually gives us the perfect baseline for this, don't they?
They do. When they define mental health, they deliberately don't just call it the absence of a mental illness.
Right.
They describe it as a state of well-being where you can cope with the normal stresses of life and, critically, where you can work productively.
And that baseline of coping and productivity is crucial because it's constantly under threat by the sheer friction of daily life.
Exactly. When we look at a massive 2013 study from the World Travel and Tourism Council, 80% of the respondents stated that travel directly improved their general mood and outlook on life.
80%. That's huge.
Yeah, and another 75% said it significantly reduced their stress.
I mean, on the surface, that sounds like the most obvious statistic in the world. Obviously, if you're holding a tropical drink instead of a spreadsheet, your stress goes down.
Well, sure.
But the research we have here suggests it's not just the absence of work, it's that travel is actively, physically changing how your brain functions.
Yes, and this brings us to a concept called cognitive flexibility.
Okay, what's that?
So Adam Galinsky, he's a professor who studies the deep connections between human creativity and international travel. He found that foreign experiences actually physically increase the depth and integrativeness of our thoughts.
Integrativeness of thought. I can sort of guess what that means, but how does that actually manifest in the brain when we travel, like practically speaking?
Think about your brain at home. It runs on a series of deeply rutted, incredibly efficient highways. You know how to drive to work, you know your native language, you know how your local grocery store is laid out.
Yeah, autopilot.
Right? You operate on mental autopilot, which conserves energy. But when you drop yourself into a foreign environment, say a city where the street signs are in an unfamiliar alphabet, those mental highways are suddenly blocked.
Oh, wow.
You have to bushwhack entirely new neural pathways. You are forced to reconcile completely different ways of living, communicating, and problem solving. By taking disparate, unfamiliar ideas and forcing them to connect, your mind literally becomes more flexible.
So it's basically the mental equivalent of cross-training at the gym.
Exactly.
You're working muscles you normally just let atrophy. But what about the physical toll? Because, I mean, I love going to new places, but I always associate long-distance travel with brutal jet lag, sleeping in strange beds, and just feeling generally exhausted. Yet, the research points out that crossing time zones is somehow a physical benefit.
I know, it seems completely counterintuitive. But experiencing different time zones and entirely new physical environments forces a massive internal clock reset.
A reset.
Yeah, imagine someone who has terrible sleep hygiene at home. Maybe they lay in bed doom scrolling on their phone every single night until 2 a.m.
Guilty.
Right? We all are. But that behavior is tied to their physical environment. Travel violently rips you out of that specific context. It forces a hard reset on your circadian rhythm because the sun is suddenly coming up at a different time and your body just has to adapt. This often leads to markedly improved sleep quality that lasts long after you return home. Plus, the physical activities tied to travel, walking 10 miles around a historic city, hiking, or just practicing mindfulness in a scenic place, they lead to a measurable, documented increase in long-term hopefulness.
I always picture it like my old laptop.
How so?
Well, when it's running 100 background programs, the memory is clogged and the cooling fan is just screaming. You can't just close one window to fix it.
Right.
You have to hold down the power button, wipe the temporary memory completely, and force a hard reboot. When it turns back on, it functions perfectly again.
The neurological research supports that analogy beautifully, actually.
Which totally explains the productivity paradox that the Harvard Business Review discovered. They studied over 400 travelers and found that 94% of people returned from a trip with as much or even more energy than before they left.
It's incredible.
Yeah. We aren't taking time off work to escape work forever. We are taking time off to be fundamentally better, sharper, and more energetic when we get back. But I do have to challenge the premise slightly.
Okay, go for it.
Is the biological benefit just tied to moving our physical bodies across a geographic border? Like if I fly to Paris, lock myself in a hotel room, and just eat imported snacks while watching the same streaming shows I watch at home, do I still get that cognitive reboot?
You've hit on the absolute core distinction in the research there.
Really?
Yeah, it is not about geography. It is entirely about mindset. To answer that, we have to look at a quote from our sources by the writer Paul Theroux. He famously noted, "Tourists don't know where they've been, travelers don't know where they're going."
Oh, that is a sharp critique of the typical vacation.
It is, and the psychological data backs Theroux up completely. The mental health benefits, like boosting your confidence by stepping into the unknown, or fulfilling what the psychologist Abraham Maslow called our fundamental human need for love and belonging.
Yeah.
None of that happens if you just mindlessly check famous tourist traps off a list.
So you have to actually engage.
Right. The cognitive flexibility we discussed only triggers when you adopt the traveler's mindset. It's the active willingness to seek out uncomfortable or unfamiliar experiences, to embrace uncertainty, and to attempt to connect with local people.
So the magic isn't in the plane ticket, it's in the vulnerability of being an outsider.
Beautifully put.
And because that psychological and biological shift is so profoundly human, we've spent centuries trying to capture that exact feeling in words. I mean, how do you take that deeply complex, vulnerable feeling of a hard cognitive reboot and sell it?
The evolution from ancient philosophy to modern consumer marketing is brilliant, really. Companies know we have this biological drive, and they have essentially weaponized language to tap directly into it.
Yeah, I was looking at the breakdown from Starter's story in our sources. They outline the absolute fundamental rules of a great brand slogan. They argue a tagline needs to be ruthless-like, keep it under 10 words, focus entirely on what makes you different, ensure it has longevity by ignoring trendy internet slang, and hyper-fixate on the emotional needs of the audience.
And when you hold classic corporate slogans up to those rules, you really see the psychology at play. Look at Airbnb's famous slogan, "Belong anywhere."
Belong anywhere.
2 words. But think about what it's promising. When you travel, you are vulnerable. You are disconnected. By promising that you will belong, they're directly targeting Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Oh, wow.
They aren't selling a cheap room to sleep in. They are selling a profound psychological salve for the anxiety of being an outsider. Or take Adidas with impossible is nothing. That is a direct appeal to the confidence building and cognitive flexibility that comes from pushing your boundaries.
The travel-specific slogans are incredibly targeted, too. You have companies using Eat Less, Travel More, or Princess Cruises, whose tagline for a long time was simply, escape completely.
Escape completely is the ultimate verbalization of the escape room metaphor we started with. It is an absolute siren song for the burned-out worker.
But then you compare these polished, focus-grouped corporate taglines to classic historical travel quotes. Samuel Johnson, the 18th century writer, said, "The use of traveling is to regulate imagination by reality, and instead of thinking how things may be, to see them as they are."
A great quote.
Yeah, or you look at someone modern but anti-corporate like Anthony Bourdain, whose core advice was simply to drink heavily with locals whenever possible.
Very Bourdain.
Right. So I'm wondering, are modern marketing slogans just repackaging ancient, profound human wisdom into bite-sized consumerism, or is there a genuine, distinct psychological promise being made by these brands?
What's fascinating here is that a truly effective slogan functions as a psychological contract. It isn't just a catchy, superficial phrase to sell consumerism. It is a brand's direct, actionable promise to solve the exact psychological friction you are experiencing.
A contract.
Yes. When a cruise line tells you to escape completely, they are actively acknowledging your burnout. They are looking at your spreadsheet-filled life and saying, we see the monotony, we understand the toll it takes, and we have engineered a product that will facilitate the hard reboot your brain is begging for. They're absolutely utilizing ancient human wisdom, but they are applying it as a modern, packaged psychological solution.
That makes total sense. We spent a lot of time exploring the internal mental journey of travel, how it forces our brains to rewire, and how marketing companies promise to facilitate that rewiring. But the physical reality of how we achieve that escape, like the actual metal tubes we sit in to cross the planet, is on the verge of the biggest technological leap since the Wright brothers. We are about to completely redefine what the phrase "a long journey" even means.
Oh, without a doubt. We are looking at a paradigm shift in human mobility that makes the jump from the horse to the steam train look minor.
Our sources include an incredibly dense, fascinating report on the HyperNext project. And this isn't just some Silicon Valley startup's flashy pitch deck. This is a massively funded European Union initiative exploring the creation of a Hyperloop ecosystem across Europe.
Real government backing.
Exactly. This is governments putting serious research into how to build, fund, and regulate this technology. For the listener who only vaguely knows the word Hyperloop as a sci-fi buzzword, let's break down how this machine actually operates.
At its core, a Hyperloop system strips away the two massive forces that slow down every other form of transit mechanical friction and air resistance. To do this, it relies on four main architectural components. First is the pod, or the capsule. This is the pressurized vehicle that actually holds the passengers or the freight. Second is the infrastructure itself, the network of tubes. But these aren't just empty steel pipes. They feature incredibly advanced pressure maintenance systems that continuously pump the ambient air out, creating a near-vacuum environment inside the tube.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me. Whenever I picture the Hyperloop, I always envision the old pneumatic tubes they use at the drive-thru of a bank.
Oh, sure.
You put your cash in the plastic canister, shove it in the pipe, the air kicks on, and whoosh, it gets pushed into the building. Is the Hyperloop just a bank tube scaled up to fit human beings?
It's tempting to think of it that way. But a bank tube uses pushed air pressure to force the canister forward. The Hyperloop is actually the exact opposite.
Wait, really?
Yeah, because it's a near vacuum, there is no air to push. It's much more accurate to think of it as a spacecraft. We are essentially building a tunnel of outer space right here on Earth and flying a vehicle through it.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. If you remove the air, you completely remove aerodynamic drag, which is what ruins fuel efficiency for commercial airplanes.
Exactly the point. Now, to eliminate the other problem, mechanical friction, we look at the third component, which is the levitation interface. The pods do not roll on steel wheels like a train. They utilize magnetic levitation.
Like magnets repelling each other.
Yes. Imagine taking two incredibly strong magnets and pushing the identical poles together. You can feel them violently pushing back against your hands. The Hyperloop uses that electromagnetic repulsion to lift a multi-ton pod into the air, allowing it to float inside the tube. So now you have a vehicle with zero friction from the ground and zero drag from the air.
But wait, if the entire tube is a literal vacuum simulating outer space, how do passengers actually get inside the pod without explosive decompression? I mean, you can't just open a door on the side of a vacuum tube.
Which brings us to the fourth and perhaps most complex critical component, the airlocks. Think how a submarine works. The pod arrives at a station, but it enters a specialized sealed transitional chamber.
Okay.
The massive doors close behind it, sealing the chamber off from the main vacuum tube. Then, atmospheric pressure is slowly pumped back into that isolated chamber until it matches the normal air pressure of the station. Only then can the pod doors safely open for passengers to disembark.
Okay, as a naturally skeptical person, I have to ask the obvious question. If I am sitting inside a windowless metal spacecraft, floating on magnets, traveling through a vacuum tube at 700 miles per hour...
I know where this is going.
Right.
Yeah.
What happens if the power grid fails? Am I just permanently trapped in a pipe?
It's the most common fear, and the HyperNext report heavily addresses the need for fail-safe systems. If the power fails, the vehicle doesn't just violently drop out of the sky.
That's a relief.
Yeah. The magnetic field may decay, but the pods are designed with physical landing skids or redundant safety wheels that would gently engage the track as the pod glides to a stop. The tube environments would also require emergency pressurization systems to flood the vacuum with breathable air in the event of an evacuation.
Which is why the engineering standards have to be flawless. And if they pull it off, the benefits outlined in the report are completely staggering. Because it's magnetically propelled, it is 100% electric with zero direct emissions.
Huge for the environment.
Right. In an era desperate for global decarbonization, a transit system that matches the speed of an airplane without burning thousands of gallons of jet fuel is a massive victory. Plus, it requires a much smaller land footprint than an 8-lane highway, and because the sound is contained within a vacuum tube, there is virtually zero noise pollution for the towns it passes through.
The end-to-end journey times are what will truly alter human geography. We're talking about traveling 1,000 kilometers in a fraction of the time it takes today. You completely bypass the hours spent waiting in airport security, taxiing on runways, or circling in air traffic control holding patterns.
That sounds like a dream.
It does. You board centrally located stations and arrive at your destination in minutes.
But you can't just drop a 1,000-kilometer vacuum tube across the map of Europe over a long weekend. The legal and financial logistics seem even more daunting than the physics.
The report is remarkably clear-eyed about that, actually. The hurdles are monumental. Funding an infrastructure project of this scale requires unprecedented public-private partnerships. No single tech company has the capital or the legal authority to buy up land rights, bore tunnels, and build tubes across multiple sovereign nations. And the legislation is severely lagging behind the engineering.
Oh, I bet. Think about the concept of international borders alone. If a Hyperloop tube connects Paris to Berlin, it crosses international lines. How does border security even function? Do customs agents scan passports at 700 miles an hour?
They absolutely don't, which means the entire framework of how we handle customs, immigration, and border checkpoints has to be radically redesigned. Will passengers be cleared before boarding? Will the destination station act as international territory?
It's a logistical nightmare.
Completely. Furthermore, the EU is deeply concerned with interoperability. They want to ensure that a pod manufactured by an aerospace company in Spain can run seamlessly on a track built by a different engineering firm in Germany. They're trying desperately to avoid a fragmented system where different countries build different-sized tubes or use incompatible magnetic standards.
So, if the technology works in theory, but the bureaucratic red tape is this thick, what does the timeline actually look like? When do I get to buy a ticket for my psychological hard reboot?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the HyperNext report provides a very sobering, methodical gap analysis. They state clearly that the next 5 years are not about putting commercial passengers in tubes.
No.
Not at all. The next half-decade is strictly focused on solving these short-term technical and legislative hurdles. It is entirely about standardization, drafting international legal frameworks for safety certifications, and building small-scale, closed-loop test tracks to prove that the airlock and levitation systems are mathematically fail-safe.
So it's all groundwork.
Exactly. They're laying the tedious bureaucratic and engineering foundation right now so that long-term commercialization is actually possible. It is a slow, methodical process to build an entirely new global standard for transit.
Man, it is genuinely incredible to map out the entire arc of what we've discussed today. We started by looking at the deep-seated biological need that humans have to pull the fire alarm on our daily routines.
Right.
We learned how stepping into the unknown forces our brains to bushwhack new neural pathways, acting as a psychological hard reset that improves our cognitive flexibility and restores our energy. And then we explored how the language of travel has evolved, from the philosophical poetry of Samuel Johnson to the hyper-targeted, deeply psychological promises of modern corporate marketing, attempting to bottle and sell that exact magic.
It's a wild progression.
It is. And finally, we looked at how the Hyperloop is methodically racing toward us, preparing to physically transform the journey itself by marrying our desperate desire for frictionless escape with the absolute cutting edge of sustainable physics.
It paints a vivid picture of a species that refuses to stay static. We are constantly pushing the boundaries of our own horizons, whether that's internally rewiring our own minds or physically building vacuum tubes to shoot us across the globe.
Before we wrap up, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final, slightly provocative thought drawn directly from the HyperNext report that we haven't touched on yet. While we obsess over passenger travel, the report proposes a future route connecting Europe and China along the ancient Silk Route,
A massive undertaking.
spanning up to 8,000 kilometers. But alongside passengers, the report highlights a massive, highly lucrative, and potentially much more immediate use case freight.
And this raises an incredibly disruptive question about the global supply chain.
Right, I really want you to ponder this. What happens to the global economy when an 8,000-kilometer cargo shipment takes a matter of hours instead of spending weeks slowly crossing the ocean on a container ship? Think about the fast fashion industry or global electronics trade. Will the Hyperloop completely revolutionize the physical goods we buy, fundamentally reshaping global commerce, long before the safety certifications ever allow you or me to buy a passenger ticket?
It is highly probable that the very device you are listening to this on right now, or the parts required to build it, will experience the vacuum of the hyperloop years before any human being does.
A completely fascinating, slightly surreal reality to look forward to. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We encourage you to keep exploring the world, to keep bushwhacking those neural pathways, and to strive to be a true traveler rather than just a tourist checking off a list. So go ahead, pack that bag, step out of the escape room of your daily routine, and leave the door wide open behind you. Catch you next time.